longevity lifestyle designers. This is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com as well as martin-kilgour.com. And the synchronicity around me making this little video series here was unbelievable. I literally just got a message before sitting down to shoot this from a friend of mine on Facebook, Lou, who was asking me to explain to him exactly what I'm about to do in this video series. Ching-Yuen is a Taoist sage from times gone by who was purportedly to have lived about 256 years old, and at which point his death was talked about or mentioned in the May 5th, 1933 issue of Time magazine. They were saying that he lived to be this age and that his birth was sometime in the 1700s. Now, there's obviously no concrete evidence for this. This is obviously goes back beyond a time when there was really solid evidence, at least in the way that the Guinness Book of World Records would like to see it held in. However, this is perhaps the greatest example of a longevity myth or legend that has the most amount of proof to back it up. There were actually records kept at that time in China, and there were records of the emperor at the time of Ching-Yuen's 150th birthday, congratulating him on that birth, congratulating him on reaching that age. So there's record of that. There's obviously not a birth record of him being born at the time that is said for him to have been born at. However, there is, like I said, these lineage holdings that show these records. Now, the Li family, which is a lineage of family members, that Li is their last name. In Chinese, they put the last name first. So the Li family is a family lineage that actually had a number of centenarians and very long-lived practitioners or sages, you could say, of Taoism. They were actually a family of bodyguards, and Ching-Yuen was quite far back in terms of when that lineage was said to have originated or really started to become well known in China. Without getting too much into detail on that family lineage, I want to focus on this individual, Ching-Yuen, and his specifically his 4 recommendations or secrets for a long life. And if you want to learn more about the Li family, I would encourage you to visit the website that talks about the Li family arts and their current tradition that is ongoing and actually being held by Shifu John Painter in the US here, down below us here in Canada. And there's schools actually that teach these arts throughout North America and even a bit in Europe and the UK. So that's 9dragonbagwajong.com, and I'll provide a link below if you want to check that out. So what evidence do we have of Ching-Yuen having lived to this great, almost incredible age? Well, there's the evidence by the family's records, of them keeping the records. However, there's some dispute about whether there was actually an individual who had the same name as Li, and they just sort of almost like a mix-up between that, and that could actually be his father's name, and it was 2 individuals that their lifespans put together were 256 years of age. And even if that were so, you're adding 2 people together and having their lifespan as being seen as one, you're going to have still 2 very long-lived individuals, because the second one's going to have to be born at whatever point in the first one's life. So say he was even a late father, he had a child at 40 or 50. There's still another 200 years that this individual had to live to reach the age of 256 if he was measuring from the age of his father. So that aside, there's obviously a lot of controversy around this. There's no evidence, but we have to look at the facts. There was a number of people that in the village of where Li lived in Sichuan province in China that claimed to these were older people, seniors in the village, and they claimed to have seen or known Li since they were young, and they said he hadn't changed a bit, and when they were young he looked the same. He was an older citizen in their village or in and around their area. So in their lifespan they never saw him change, although these were people that they asked, went back and asked about at his time of death. One of Li's students, General Yang Sen, who was a general in China, who for part of his life, or at some point in his life, got relegated or had to move to Hong Kong because of the Communist Revolution. He was a martial artist and had his own lineage of practices that were no longer accepted in China, so he had to flee. But at some point in his lifespan there, he went back to China at the time of Li's death to investigate his claims of extreme longevity. And he's the one who asked and found out about the fact that there was these older people in the villages, or the village where he lived, that were saying that he was actually this age. And he also had the opportunity to study from him. He learned some of his arts and practices and Qigong and herbalism practices, tonic herbalism, that Li recommended and were part of his program for living such an amazingly long life. So this is what Li Ching-Yuen resembles. This is a picture taken by General Yang Sen or someone, one of his employees or something. It was done on the recommendation of General Yang Sen because they wanted to document what this character looked like. So here it is. So obviously this is a very old photograph, and because, you know, that old style photography had to stay still, the individual had to stay still for a long time just to get that image. That's why you see in a lot of old photographs no one's ever smiling. So don't be dismayed by sort of the grimace on his face. It's just a product of the photography of that era. But you can see a really interesting looking character. He's got the sort of traditional Taoist robe and the garb that they would have worn at that time. I personally have taken Li almost as an inspiration in my own lifestyle and approach to health and increasing my longevity potential. And part of these recommendations are these 4 sayings, which is going to be, I'm going to focus on each one of these over the course of this video series. So number 1 is keep a quiet heart. Number 2 is sit like a tortoise. Number 3 is walk sprightly like a pigeon. And number 4 is sleep like a dog. So these 4 recommendations were written in the original Time article that was published in 1933. And there's a lot of philosophical potential in here that I'm going to cover in this series. And first of all, it's my opinion. It's not what has been written about by other people as far as I know. So it's just my interpretation of these 4 principles. And I also make no claims as to these being the absolute only way to understand these principles. As an aside, I'd also like to mention that Li Ching-Yuen was a master herbalist, and for a large portion of his life he was wandering in the mountains of China, collecting herbs, and that was his, almost you could say, career. He was also a martial artist and worked also for a time, or according to the records, as a general in his 70s. This was amazing. He taught Tai Chi Chuan to the soldiers, and Qigong to soldiers in China to help them with their health and their prowess as fighting soldiers. So the herbs that Li recommended use for longevity, which he learned throughout his travels, were Goji Berries. He's one of the big and first proponents of Goji Berries for longevity. Shou Wu, which is an increasingly popular herb with many beneficial properties. Both of these together, Goji Berries and Shou Wu, have the potential to increase the yin-jing of the body, the core foundational energy. Of course, he also recommended the use of ginseng in combination with Shou Wu in sort of like a rice wine extract. You could think of that as an alcohol tincture along with licorice root and Gotu Kola. So you can find links to sources of these herbs as well as articles that I've written about them below, and you can enjoy those, and then follow this series as well in the next parts to learn more about these 4 principles that can help you lead a longer, more vibrant lifespan.